lives and livelihoods. On one side, you have people who argue that this, unless you have a medication, unless you have a vaccine of some sort, you can't hide in your house forever. When you do finally get out, you're going to get it.
Survivor comes first. Survivor comes first. Let's not lose focus.
And then on the other side, people are like, okay, now that is the reality, just loosen up the economy and let those who feel that put the decision in the people's hands. If people consider themselves vulnerable, they stay at home. Don't decide for them, But tough one.
I think it's 2 minutes past 1 o'clock. I think we should, in the interest of time, good discussion, but I think we should kick off in the interest of time. 2 minutes past 1 o'clock. So welcome everybody. I hope you can hear me clearly.
Yes, very well.
So
I can hear you.
Oh, thank you. So welcome everybody, and thanks for joining us for SSG webcast on COVID-19, looking at the implication and the impact on African economies. So the discussion is 1 hour and a half, and we hope to go through quite a lot of topics we've prepared. And also we've invited a good panel to share their perspective and the current trend and the update on the situation to provide further clarity and guidance. Before I kick off, of course, welcome. Today I'm your host. My name is Ndagijimana, and I'm the co-founder and the CEO for SSCG Consulting, for those who doesn't know me. And I'm also the chair for One Africa Network, which is an initiative we established in the UK to support and empower African professionals, businesses, and the leaders. But we are also now working to expand globally. In addition, I'm the interim chair and the president for the African Business Chamber based in the UK, also working to facilitate trade and the investment between UK and African communities post-Brexit, and also looking at the investment opportunity. I'm supported by my partner, Dennis Aguma, who's also on the line, and he's also a partner at SSG and a co-chair for One Africa Network also, and he's a PhD lecturer at Birmingham City University. So before I deep dive into the discussion today, I just want to give you a bit brief about SSG Consulting. Originally, we used to be called Sub-Saharan Consulting Group, but we rebranded just for global growth. We have representation in Nigeria, Rwanda, UK, and the US, Washington, and we provide mainly professional consulting and the advisory services to global companies and clients, mainly focusing on business services, automotive manufacturing, and emerging market sectors, healthcare. We are looking agribusiness, agri-sector, tech industry, and other sustainable sectors of economy. And we provide a suite of services ranging from strategic planning to process transformation and improvement, technology adoption. We're looking at quality improvement, various other services, including engineering, project portfolio management, and risk containment. We can share more information for those who are interested. So for today's discussion is mainly around COVID, which has taken the center attention across the globe, and we thought it would be good to bring experts together to share perspective and insight towards the situation in Africa, as we are getting quite a lot of information differing from different media, from government, and also debate how we can work collaboratively to support during the crisis and help majority of our audience who are on the line. We have quite a good number of people who are joining us, over 100, and we are live on various social media to provide them with the guidance and the practical solution and the action that they can take today to be able to navigate the situation and prepare for recovery. So I'm sure you are aware some of the major headlines that we've seen in the last 2 months. Of course, COVID is a global crisis and human tragedy affecting millions of people, and our thoughts to everyone who have lost their life or family affected, and we hope everyone on the line is safe and well. And of course, the situation has far-reaching economic ramification. And in Africa, we're looking disruption of millions of people's livelihood with disappropriate impact on households, small and informal businesses, and is a looming threat to over 1.2 billion people. So far, confirmed cases, according to World Health Organization, 33,000 cases and 1,400 confirmed deaths so far as of last few days. So the situation is rapidly evolving, and depending which region you are in, and the pace of this disruption are likely to accelerate in the comings ahead. And of course, the unfolding health and economic crisis demand bold action. That's how it's been defined by McKinsey, and the time bomb to diffuse by World Economic Forum. So there are so many naming codes currently being used, and of course it's a challenge and a threat to many African economies. We are talking about Africa falling into GDP into recession for the first time in 25 years. Depending which economist you speak to, some will believe Africa is always in recession, is just looking to go into depression. So depend who you talk to. So lockdown also, in absence of major fiscal stimulus for businesses, and has been a challenge to major economies and individuals who are cash-based economy. And also, informal economies are struggling between daily earning for survival or faced with inevitable choices. So, and also relatively weak and underfunded healthcare system pose a threat, and looking also the numbers coming out of various economies, there's concern in terms of the appropriate diagnosis and the reporting of the real situation on the ground. So this situation currently require collective effort to safeguard our economies and livelihood, and this is why we are putting up an initiative like this one to hear from the experts what we can do today to be able to make an impact. And of course, not everything is doom and gloom. There's a bit of hope in terms of the situation. So only 3% of the population is over 65, which gives some hope that so far, looking at the Europe and the US, majority of affected are mainly over 65 population. And of course, we hope that countries can leverage the experience and lesson learned when responding to other emergencies like AIDS, TB, malaria, and Ebola, to be able to manage the current situation. And a few other things will have an announcement recently, including Africa COVID Response Fund from, I think, AfDB. Probably they'll share more about it. And we've seen a few couple of political willingness and preparedness to act decisively, ranging from South Africa to Rwanda to other economies like Ghana. And finally, African Union also has decided to mobilize the support by nominating a team of special envoy, which include Dr. Kaberuka and a few other people to spearhead the international support towards the pandemic. So to help out today, the objective, of course, is very simple. It's quite to look at some of the topics we've prepared. And I'm delighted to welcome our panel speakers to help break down some of the topic you have on the agenda and give us share their perspective on the current reality on the ground and some of the action being taken, and also help us to share their perspective and how the future look like. So from the first, we have Amira Elmissiry. Amira, are you on the line? Probably she's trying to join now. So Amira, once she's joined, she's the Chief Equity and the Catalyst Investment with the private sector operation at AfDB, where she led the team to originate equity transaction. And she's a seasonal lawyer with international experience who having worked on various major projects across Africa. Second, and unfortunately, Dr. Jonathan Pinifolo has just emailed me an hour ago. He's unable to make it due to completing priority and an emergency. We hope that he'll be able to join our future discussion. Third, we have Dr. Bankole, who's the CEO and founder of Translantic Development Limited and an environmental health safety specialist and consultant on various international organizations, including World Bank, ERM, which is Environmental Resource Management Consulting firm that work with mainly oil and gas mining and looking at ESG, environmental and sustainability governance initiative. And fourth, we have Dieudonne, who's our director based in Rwanda and the lead for industrial manufacturing within the region. He has expertise working various companies, mainly manufacturing from Heineken, Bralirwa, Coca-Cola, and various other manufacturing production companies across Africa. Fourth, we are delighted to have Dr. Enoq Nyorekwa, who is the senior economist at the Sustainable Development Goal Center Africa, based in Uganda, supporting the mandate and accelerating SDG implementation across African countries. And finally, we have Neza, who's a senior investment officer at AfDB. Neza is also an entrepreneur who has launched and founded several other initiatives, including Tech Innovation Rwanda, has also worked as a consultant on ICT projects with UNESCO, US Embassy Kigali, YAL Connect, and the other things, including UNESCO. So welcome. Probably I give everyone to introduce themselves and give a bit of brief about how the current situation, the current reality, before we deep dive into the discussion. Amira, are you on the line? Hello? I think she's trying. If I go to Dr. Bankole, if you can introduce yourself probably before we can get Amira to try and connect, that would be helpful. And give a bit of brief about your background, what you do, and how the current COVID-19 situation has disrupted your business and work as usual, and what are some of the trends and the disruption you are seeing at the moment.
Thank you very much, Eugene. My name is Dr. Bankole Allibay. I am an environmental and social governance expert. I hold over 15 years experience in managing large infrastructural development projects globally. I work essentially in Africa, South America, and North America. I am a development expert. I'm an internationally published author. I am a gender specialist, and I also I specialize in development-induced displacements and livelihood restoration and sustainability in general. So basically, the context that we're looking at COVID-19 from is wide, but I think we need to look at it from the root cause perspective. It's a zoonotic viral infection, which means it's not a laboratory infection like a lot of people think. It's actually an infection that has actually been caused as a result of human invasion of the forest resource or the biodiversity environment. So we would not be talking about this particular viral infection, if the human race has not particularly invaded the biodiversity habitat, which does not belong to us really. We benefit a lot from it, but it's not the right thing to do. And that begs a big question around Africa. it begs a question of sustainable consumption, it begs a question of sustainable livelihood, it begs a question around even information management. And beyond that, it also begs a question of the context of sustainability in its entirety. And we see now that it started as a health crisis, and it has moved gradually to become an economic crisis, and it has become a food security crisis. And very soon it's going to become a social conflict crisis, because again, when people become crowded in a single place and they can't go out, so many other social ills will begin to amount to them. And that has been actually happening in some parts of Africa. So how has this actually affected? Well, it's a hydra-headed situation, as we can see. A lot of businesses are shut down completely. People can't go out. The value chain is completely disrupted. And yeah, it's not all gloom and doom. Also, new businesses have actually begun to emerge. New strategies are beginning to emerge. But again, we need to understand that we shouldn't allow this crisis to go to waste. If not, we might not be able to survive it if we have another wave of it. I'll just keep it there before we go to the next point.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bankole, for that brief introduction. If I double check, Amira, did you manage to connect? Not yet. Probably I'll go to Dr. Enoq next to introduce himself and also give a bit of brief in terms of what's the current situation on his side and how this disruption and the reality on the ground. Hi, Enoq. Hello, Enoq. We've lost him a bit. Hi, Enoq. Can you hear me? Hi, Enoq.
Eugene, unmute him. I think he's on mute.
I've tried to unmute him. It's not coming off.
It's still showing us muted. So try again.
Yes.
Although Enoq, if you're listening, you can also unmute yourself.
Hi, Enoq. Can you hear? No. I think before we sort out the technical issues, let me invite Neza to introduce herself and give a bit of brief about the situation at the moment in terms of the work and business as usual, and a bit of brief background in her career in terms of what she does and within the African space. Hi, Neza. Hi, Neza, can you hear me? Hello, Ne. Oh. She can't hear also. Dennis, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear. I can also see you. Let me check. Unmute. Can I suggest you unmute everyone, and hopefully
People don't keep talking.
And then we'll see whether anyone can listen. Okay, so we can get some sounds.
Did you skip me? I hadn't.
Hi, Enoq, can you hear me?
The internet is on and off.
Okay. Now you can mute everyone back, Eugene.
Hello, Enoq.
Hi, Eugene.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, so we just wanted you to introduce yourself also and give a bit of brief in terms of your background and what the current situation at the moment.
Sure, I'll dive into that. Enoq Nyorekwa Twinoburyo. I am an economic scholar. I work for the Sustainable Development Goals Center, which is based in Kigali as the senior economist, and also lead on the research projects that we undertake. So in terms of perspective about the COVID, I I'd want to say about 2-3 things that maybe could also guide the discussion. One is the pace in which the trickle down of the health pandemic is into the economics of economies, and then also the responses which are being put in place without necessarily the sufficiency of planning, and that could lead to leakages, particularly in Africa. So those are some of the things that I want to put into context, but also the uncertainty that surrounds the whole remedies for containing the virus, because what we see is that it hangs in the near term, but all our planning is aligned to the short term perspective.
Okay, welcome, Dr. Enoq. Is Dieudonne, are you on the line?
Yes, John, I am.
Welcome, and thank you for joining us. Please, if you can take a few minutes to just introduce yourself and give a bit background in terms of what you do and what's the situation in Rwanda, and how the COVID-19 has disrupted the supply chain and business as usual, and how the government is supporting to trying to overcome some of the challenges.
Thank you, Jen. Good afternoon, everybody. For sure, first let me introduce myself. I'm Dieudonne Ndagijimana. I'm an SSG director in industrial manufacturing, and I am working with Heineken in Africa and the Middle East of Africa to certify Heineken operating a company in Lean Six Sigma. I'm also working with Coca-Cola as a Coca-Cola quality manager in Kigali itself. And I have experience in a different kind of manufacturing industry. So for Rwanda now, COVID is impacting our business in manufacturing for sure. You can see now, for us manufacturers, we talk in terms of lines. If you can see a line which is locked down, which is shut down for 1 week, while it was working 24 hours, 7 days, and stop it for only overhauls or other breakdown which are not planned. But now for sure, you can spend a whole week without business, without manufacturing. Rwanda, we tried to do not stop manufacturing as a whole, but if people are locked down, for sure, there is no business. People are not buying or selling because they are locked. And now we can make 2 production per week, maximum 2 production per week, and you will run the line for the morning only. You will not line. You will run the line for 8 hours only. You can understand which will be the impact. Apart from that, we are trying to respect the measure from the country. We have to reduce also people. People working on the site. Around the 2/4 of people are now, 3/4 even, are themselves locked in their home. You can say they're working from home, but now you know Africa, we are not used in such kind of work. It means those people are really not working. And some company have even started to stop or to reduce the salary up to 20%. You can understand which will be the impact on the families. And those companies or those lines even which are locked down, they're still waiting for maintenance. Starting will not be easy because now we have to maintain the machine which are not working. That is also a maintenance cost which will be involved. So for sure we are not at a good in a good situation. Thank you, Agent.
Thanks you, Dieudonne, for that brief introduction. And if I go to Neza next, if you can quickly, briefly introduce yourself, give a bit background in terms of what you do with the AfDB, and of course, and shed some light on the area of on the investment aspect within the region and how the situation has disrupted business as usual, and where do you see things as they evolve?
Thank you very much, Eugene. I'm having issues with my internet. I first want to make sure if my voice is coming out clearly.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. All right. Apologize. I have to keep the video off so that the internet can remain stable at least within the time that I'm speaking. So my name is Neza, and as stated by presenters, I work at the African Development Bank, a structure called African Investment Forum, as a senior investment officer, and I'm also in charge of ICT. So my background by education, I'm an ICT engineer, but I also did a minor finance bachelor's degree in investments and operation. So my role, my day-to-day role as a development professional at the bank is I'm part of the investment team, and our role is to look at investment opportunities on the continent and screen the most promising ones and assess their adequacy for investments, either a potential debt or equity, depending on the financing instrument and the needs of the countries. So we look at transactions across a wide spectrum of sectors, all the sectors. And I also work for a structure called the African Investments Forum, which is a platform whose role is to help advance projects to bankable stage, look at some of the early projects on the continent that are very transformative and innovative, and see how we can help countries in terms of advisory support, in terms of providing funding for preparation, so that those projects can move off the line and advance to financial closure or be able to be implemented or approach the DFIs. So sharing my views on, and in line with my background, my views on the COVID, of course, there are halos across all sectors, and people are wondering, DFIs are thinking about different areas of intervention. But one thing I will say as an individual is that the COVID pandemic made us rethink the way we live, even reflecting on simple priorities such as buying stuff locally as the top of priorities. For instance, where do we find some of the stuff that are forcibly imported if the shops are stock out at this time? Where do we get some of those imported products? And all of this goes with increasing the manufacturing capacity on the countries beyond just improving health in general. And from DFI and the investment perspective, the countries themselves now have to rethink on the way to approach investors, shifting their mindset from individual financing, for instance, to nexus approaches, where they will be taking into account now approaching investors with projects that have the multi-sector and the multi-sector approach. And that is what have been touched by some of the colleagues, looking at innovative projects where you see a health project, for example, that includes some layers of technology, some layers of manufacturing, and even job creation. And the key concern now is to find the most innovative and the most ready opportunities, because there is also a risk profile that have increased with the COVID across countries. For example, some projects have been delayed, some sponsors are becoming more reluctant to proceed with some of their projects because of the COVID. They're waiting for everything to stop so that they will see how things are progressing. And the role of DFIs really now is to work, I'll speak about it from two angles. I'll talk from regional blocks and from the development institutions themselves. What are we looking at now to uplift the country's economy? One of the efforts that we are looking forward to is to work the regional blocks such as the African Union. I'll touch on some of the initiatives that have been recently announced, where some of our key leaders such as Kaberuka and Ngozi that are now been appointed as special envoy to mobilize international investment. How do we work with them to make sure that the investments that we are bringing on the phone now align with their agenda, to pull together all the key players, for instance, in the countries, the pension funds, the sovereign wealth fund, the family businesses. How are they working together to realign some of their priorities so that they will more tap into the arising demand now? The other thing that the DFIs are doing now, there is a lot of COVID responses facilities that have been announced by the likes of the bank. For instance, the Africa Development Bank recently announced a 10 billion COVID facility. The AfDB announced a 3 billion COVID facility. Same to the World Bank, the private sector arm, the AFC announced about 40 billion. And what they are looking now is to promote innovative investment for projects and also prioritize, of course, those projects that have multi-sector and multi-pronged impacts. And the critical sectors that we are looking at now and that, of course, align with the need are sectors such as ICT, sectors such as infrastructure services, the e-commerce, for example, the acceleration of imports, online delivery, and all of that. Yeah, so I just wanted to point that there is a strong support from the development finance institutions to work with country in identifying opportunities and trying to reduce the risk profile for those countries, taking into account the arising demand. Thank you.
Thank you, Neza, for that brief. Can you see me? Thank you for that brief introduction. And I just want to double check. Amira, are you on the line? Hi, Amira. She hasn't managed to join there. So if I go back to Dr. Bankole, if you just give, as we know, COVID has taken the center stage. At the same time, everyone heart and the strategy and health and safety is a key priority as you talk to the government, to business, to individual. And that's where we are where we are because of COVID-19 and the implication and the impact on health and safety. What's the situation with the clients you are working with? How are they planning to manage the safety and the health of their people? And where do you see the situation evolve? And how was the implication in terms of within the region? And how can the businesses, what are the key learning they can take away? Hi, Bankole.
Thank you very much, Eugene. I was on mute. I was on mute before. So generally, I will speak to the wider health and safety and the sustainability framework of how exactly we can actually adapt to the new reality, a new reality that we'll find ourselves at this stage. We need to look at it from two perspectives. Initially, from the onset, we need to look at it from the root cause, like I mentioned earlier. Where exactly are we? Why do we find ourselves in this kind of situation? And it's a question of, like I said earlier, is the biodiversity, incursion, human being trying to go beyond our normal bounds and invading the biodiversity environment. It's also looking at even the question of sustainability in entirety, because information are not being shared freely, and because of that, people underestimated what this virus is about, and then it's been transported all over the world. But now we need to look you need to look beyond that point, and particularly in Africa, we need to look specifically at the opportunity that this has afforded us. And looking at it from a health and safety perspective, we need to first of all understand the Africa business environment. So how exactly is business planned in Africa? How are they being implemented? How do we manage businesses in Africa? So it gives us the opportunity to now begin to think around what exactly is the future of work that we're thinking about, because the future of work has actually been brought closer to us. Initially, we used to think that, oh, in 2030, 55% of the population can work remotely from anywhere. Right now, we need to start thinking about that. All businesses that needs to start thinking about it right now, because we don't need, in many cities across Africa, people spend hours on end in traffic every day. For example, people that work in Lagos will understand what that means for you to wake up in the morning and spend 2 hours to get to work, or spend another 2 hours to get back home. When some of those things that you need to do can actually be done virtually, it can be done remotely in any location. So these are the kind of ideas that we need to start thinking about. We need to talk about access and control and social spaces. In many of the infrastructure that we use in many parts of Africa, there are no social spaces created around them. For example, you're walking around the road and then the rail line is just exactly by the berm of the road. Everyone would have to touch that berm to cross the road or to pass across the road. That means that if someone has touched it with a virus, or their hands that's infected with a virus, everybody will touch it while they're passing. So all these things need to be put into consideration. Now, that is at the micro level, but at the macro level, there is this huge need for private sector to partner with the government in providing health infrastructure, because there is no amount of first aid that you can provide that can solve a viral infection. We need to be serious about this. And at this point, we now understand the reality that many countries across the world will shut their borders at us for medical tourism. So what that tells us expressly is that we need to look inward and look for a way to solve our own problem. Yes, we can look at this as a problem, but at the same time, it's an opportunity, because this is a sound of warning that we can do it ourselves and we should really do it. Now, that's in terms of providing health sector. But again, let's look at it from another perspective, housing. If people have a viral, if a family of 2 that lives in a 1-bedroom apartment, if 2 of them got infected, the case for isolation does not exist, because where exactly are you going to isolate? In the bedroom, or in the sitting room, in the kitchen, or in the toilet? So it's not going to happen. We need to begin to think through the process of urban housing that are fit for purpose, not just urban housing that people will have to live like they are living in a hole. They need to be prepared in such a way that to accommodate people and to be fit for their purpose, and to size this family as well. So all the things that we need to look at. Another thing that we don't really take seriously in Africa, although there has been significant effort, but is not garnering the kind of support that it requires, is the issue of open defecation. Some researchers have actually come to the point that at the moment, there are some facts gathering that revealed that even for people who do not show symptoms, or people who are convalescing from the virus, or people who are fully recovered, for a couple of days, there will still be viral loads of coronavirus material within their fecal discharge. Now, in a situation where we do not have a complete or zero open defecation situation, chances are these fecal material that are being displaced all over the place can actually make it back to the food chain or make it back to our lives. So again, there is need for significant awareness about open defecation and even public conveniences, so that all these things can be controlled. Because if we wear a mask, for example, and we say, oh, I can't get it through my nose, you don't know what exactly is happening to your children. You don't know what's happening to your wife. You don't know what's happening to your husband. And these are people you won't wear masks when you see. So if they are at risk, no matter how much prepared you are in your family, in your business, in your endeavors, when you get back home, you have to take down all these guards. And if they are not protected, definitely you are not protected. Another perspective we need to look at it is the food chain. Now, the kind of food that we eat in Africa, like I was listening to I was reading up some of the research that has actually been published on COVID-19. And one of the economists, one of his points was that 90% of the people in Africa work in the informal sector. Now, if 90% of the people in Africa work in the informal sector, with the current trend of shutdown of businesses, the implication is that the 90% of people will be out of pocket. If they're out of pocket, it will affect their food security. It means they have to scavenge for whatever they can find. Now, if you have to scavenge for whatever you can find, if you don't normally buy things on the roadside where you think it might be exposed to viral infection or whatever, at this point in time, you do not have a choice. So what do you need to do? You need to begin to think about the value chain system. How do we maintain our value chain system in Africa in such a way that when products are being produced, they can actually be processed and be stored? So we don't produce materials in Africa and then it's being processed somewhere in Europe or processed somewhere in America, and then we now buy the end product. Again, we need to look at it from a perspective of intertrade within Africa. All these things actually contribute significantly to safety and security of our proceedings, of our activities across Africa. And we need to take serious responsibility for it. And again, I will speak again to my area of practice, which is environmental and social sustainability. How much dose of environmental and social sustainability, how much of it actually do we have in practice in Africa? Most policies that we have across Africa, from East to Central Africa to West Africa, where I've worked significantly, they are very, very, very obsolete. And some of these policies particularly does not protect anyone and does not particularly respond to the new realities of the world that we live in today. So we need to particularly take conscious responsibility, make conscious efforts to make policies which would respond to our current reality. For example, policies on food security are very weak. Policies on social protections are very weak. Policy on gender issues are very weak. And if we go into this COVID-19 unlock situation with all this attitude, we're likely going to get into serious problem, because if economies that have significant social safety nets are in serious trouble, apart from Tanzania Social Action Fund and very few initiatives across Africa, I don't see any African country that has a sufficient or robust social safety net. So if we don't have all this in place, we will be hard hit even far beyond other countries of the world as we speak right now. So we need to particularly take responsibility, institutionalize social sustainability and environmental sustainability in such a way that we protect the biodiversity environment, we protect the social environment, we protect the natural capitals that we have, so that we don't run out in the process. Because imagine, now we have to compete between either dying by COVID-19 or dying by hunger, which is basically standing between the devil and the deep blue sea, if you ask me. But again, there's nothing we can do. People have to eat, and people have to dodge. They have to dodge the bullet of COVID-19. So it's a very, very risky situation, but it's a moment of truth for us in Africa. It's a moment of truth because now there is no point lying about we are investing X millions of dollars in health sector. Excuse me, we don't have the health sector fixed. There's no point lying about we're investing X millions of dollars in value chain processes to ensure local production is maintained. No, we don't have all that. So we now need to look inward and start making that investment that will take us out, not just take us out of COVID-19, because if we take that approach, what we're going to end up doing is that we will solve this problem, which is like winning the war and losing the battle. Because beyond COVID-19, there's going to be life, and life is going to change completely. And we all need to take responsibility in that case. So we need strong environmental and social sustainability framework. We need policy development at the political commitment, and we need real sensitization on key health factors, particularly on sustainable consumption, sustainable resource use, value chain analysis, and also trying to ensure that issues such as open defecation, gender issues are well maintained across sector, so we don't find ourselves in a worse situation even after COVID-19.
Eugene, you're on mute.
Okay. So thank you, Dr. Bankole, for touching some of the key considerations that need to be considered, especially if we have to address the COVID-19. And of course, you've highlighted the collective effort that need to be put in place not to avoid individualism consideration. And also you highlighted the key issues regarding some of the responses being implemented that is impacting smaller or the economies that we are seeing at the moment. If I go to I can see Amira has joined us now. Thank you for joining us. If you can probably, let me take an advantage to welcome you and introduce yourself before we go to Neza, because Neza apparently she has to go to another meeting. But if Amira, you can introduce yourself and give a bit brief about your background. I know you've been involved in quite a lot of AfDB programs and investment of programs across Africa. If you give us an overview how the situation has evolved and what's the situation on your side and how COVID-19 has disrupted business or work as usual.
Great. Hi, Eugene, and my sincere apologies for joining a bit late. In any case, I'll be very brief. So as you mentioned, I'm currently working with the African Development Bank at the moment. My role has reshaped from the Chief Equity Officer, and I'm now overseeing our accountability side of the institution, which means that we measure the impact of our operations on the ground, and it's sort of a not necessarily cracking the whip, but it's to ensure that we are following what we say we would be doing with regards to development impact and results measurements. So I oversee that within the institution, and I work with, well, I can say I work with many departments in the bank. In this particular role, I'm a lawyer by profession, Zimbabwean and Egyptian by origin, and have a keen love for the continent. So that's a brief introduction of myself. Just to your very first question, very briefly, as you know, I mean, we are currently under a semi-lockdown in Côte d'Ivoire. I mean, it's interesting to see with the virus how different countries are approaching this differently. We haven't completely undertaken a complete shutdown as has initially been seen within like Nigeria or Kenya. I think within Côte d'Ivoire, we've really focused around the community spread of the disease by imposing a curfew from 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. But however, our public banks still are still running, our government services are still opened. The key services that are shut are the food and entertainment and the industries. And as mentioned, it's to curb the community spread. So I think the country's taken the approach as to not kill or shut down all businesses, understanding the impact that would have on the economy. So I'd stop there, give Neza an opportunity and come back.
Thank you, Amira, for joining us and that brief intro. If I go to Neza, can you ask? I think you. Hi, Neza.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Before you go, there's probably we just wanted these two questions. We just wanted you to answer. Also, Dr. Bankole has raised. Hello.
Sorry. Yeah, I had to switch through to the two different devices, so I went back to my phone because of internet. But I'm listening. I'm listening for a question.
Yes, before you leave, because you did mention that you want to leave earlier. There's two questions that I just wanted you to help answer. One of it, which is Dr. Bankole has raised in terms of the opportunity that we can take out of COVID. And there's also two questions that came from some of our audience. We're talking about how can we leverage the current crisis and technology to accelerate remote or digital economy in the absence of stable internet and also low-cost data. So as an expert in the digital sector and tech sector, how do you see we can accelerate the digital economy? Especially we're also talking about remote working, isolation working, and that's why we are also hosting this kind of discussion on webcast. How do you see the future of the digital economy and e-commerce within the African space?
Yes, thank you, Eugene. I I touched a little bit about the approach, the Nexus approach to promote wise investments and win-win partnership in critical sectors. And by critical sectors, what I meant was to leverage from technology, for instance, as a vector to change and increase productivity in the traditional sectors. For example, I will give very few examples in the health sector, in the education, the e-commerce, and industry. I'll start with the health. Like widely said, even by Dr. Bankole, we definitely have to admit on Africa being exposed to challenges such as inadequate health systems, manufacturing, which is largely 80% about of it depending on external imports. We have a limitation of human resources, but there is an aspect that have always been overlooked by the health sector. For instance, ICT has always been leveraged more from front office work. And by front of it, I mean HR systems, for example, the traditional internet connectivities. But with the COVID-19, how do we look beyond that and leverage technology to improve service delivery in health sector, for example? Talking from an investment perspective, there is a rise and an opportunity for entrepreneurs, for countries to integrate technology, adopt services such as, for example, drone technology to deliver drugs, lab results. There are countries, we have examples for countries such as Ghana, Rwanda, that have already started to test drone delivery in the healthcare in rural areas, for example. How can such kind of opportunities be expanded in other countries and further developed? There's another opportunity to promote the SMEs, business linkage programs, for example, in the manufacturing sector. And this is a cross-cutting area. It can work for the health sector, education, commerce, and everywhere. How can we empower our youth, for example, with technology tools that will equip them, for example, to contribute in the supply chain of the health, producing, for example, hospital bed sheets, staff uniform, small alert systems, for example. So those are some of the arising opportunities that I see that technology can be applied in the health sector. In education, while there is a wide understanding on promoting or embracing virtual classroom, there should also be a push in remembering of the schools in rural areas that do not have access to internet, that do not own computers, for example. How can countries look at other channels in promoting the remote education, for example? And here I'm talking about developing like radio programs, small applications in mobile that can be accessed by schools, for example. And this also shows the need to strengthen more internet connectivity. And by internet connectivities, there is a wide understanding on applying fiber, for example, but can countries also explore other areas such as satellites? How can youth and the SMEs be empowered, for example, to develop solar energy solutions that can be used in areas that do not have power, so that people can integrate some of their technology to be able to access electricity and go down into accessing virtual services, for example. For the e-commerce, some of the arising opportunities also that I see, e-commerce is a very wide sector in itself. There is the value chain in logistics, cross-border trade, areas of data, for example. There's a lot of things that can be improved here, or that shows the need to improve. But we have a rise of some e-commerce websites already in Africa, the likes of Jumia, for example, the likes of Take-A-Lot, the Nakumat. They varies by regions. Each region we have some of the popular e-commerce businesses, but can we encourage, for example, mergers and acquisition opportunities? We have some countries that have already tried. In Northern Africa, for example, we have Amazon that have acquired some of the e-commerce's websites, and these have significantly reduced the cost of importing goods from outside of Africa to inside, and also in job creation. But can also other countries of the continent consider such opportunities, attract those big e-commerce solution providers to come and improve the entire e-commerce value chain, the logistics, for example? This is an emerging opportunity. It taps onto the health sector. It taps onto fostering innovation where the youth can be empowered, people moving from being a bank population to becoming a banking through embracing digital economy, for example, increasing the rate of subscription to online payment modes, for example. So those are the greatly arising opportunities that the continent and countries can look at in the e-commerce value chain. For the industry, the main area that needs to be empowered is capacity building. There are emerging models in Africa where many countries are now moving towards developing socioeconomic zones, for example. And in those socioeconomic zones, there are opportunities to innovate, but we need to increase the capacity of Africans so that they can also be able to go beyond just assembling good that comes from outside of the continent, but actually working on the raw materials themselves. So being involved across the entire manufacturing value chain, because it's something we cannot ignore. The COVID is here. Yes, the imports will be delayed even long after the COVID. There will be a very long queue in distributing equipment in all sectors, constructions. Many projects will be delayed within their timeline. What are Africans thinking about? So how can we start working towards short-term solutions to address and some of those challenges? And these all come to access to education, skills. There's a lot of materials online where people can choose which area to specialize in, but we all need access to connectivity and content development. So we need access to materials that also align with our contexts, and all of that taps into technology. There's also an area on data information and data harmonization. E-commerce cannot work, for example, cross countries if countries have not enacted data laws, for example, to allow different websites to trade among themselves because of information sharing, for example, because of the issues with sharing confidential information on payment, for example. So those are the arising opportunities that we need dependent in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you, Ernest, for that in-depth discussion, and also mentioning a few things in how we can improve the digital economy and some of the infrastructure challenges we are facing at the moment. If I go to Dr. Enoq. Dr. Enoq, are you on the phone? Hi, Enoq.
Hi. Sorry, I was in mute.
So
I was in mute, but I hope you can see me and you can hear me loudly.
Yes, we can hear you. So from a macro perspective, if you can help us to understand, of course, with COVID-19, we've seen differing responses from most of the governments with various responses. Some of them are copy and paste from a Western plan and without a proper assessment of the feasibility and the environment, the infrastructure, local infrastructure. How do you see the situation likely, especially some of the responses we've seen are likely also to impact SDG goals and roll them back for a couple of years. How do you like to see the situation from, if you can give us examples from various countries, what are the changes, the impact, and from an economic perspective?
So thanks. You've given me a broad realm of topic to cover, given the SDGs and the macro and how they interface. So I would want to start with the known trend, which is, we know that the world is in a recession, and we also do not know to what extent the recession might go on, because if you look at the most recent forecast by IMF, which forecasts Sub-Saharan Africa to be in a recession this year and have negative growth of 1.6, underneath that is a more optimistic assumption that the second half of 2020 would be in recovery. But looking at the uncertainty in finding remedies, and some of the countries like South Africa that were trying to go into opening of the lockdown, you see that cases are reappearing, and there the whole assumption of having a V, like a ball, bounce the ball kind of recovery is not likely, and which then now brings me to a more compelling issue in terms of the response that we are putting in place, because and part of this it was also, I think, alluded to by Neza in terms of the risk premium that is growing, particularly for Africa. What we've seen is that even in the short term, because of the outlook risks, the investors have pulled the money out. The level of capital outflows are unprecedented. What this means is that the exchange rates for most African economies are going to be affected, and you will see rapid depreciation like we saw in 2015. And when that happens, it has implications for, one, fiscal policy. It has implications for imports. It also has implications on the other end, where the exchange rate is considered to be an automatic stabilizer, that people might move away from taking cornflakes and go back to eating cassava and locally produced goods. So there's an opportunity there, but in terms of downside effects, we see that the exchange rate is going to increase the risk premium, particularly for foreign investors, and that has led to an outflow of capital, the capital income, and what that means also, you've seen that again. For most economies in Africa, they are trying to apply capital controls, which is never, in ideal circumstances, applied, because it affects also the exchange rate management. But at the moment, if you don't apply capital controls, then a lot of capital would leave the continent and would leave you. And for most economies which have flexible exchange rate systems, which have flexible exchange rate systems, you'd not have if you're going to manage the exchange rate, you'd wipe down the foreign currency reserves. And what makes things worse is that half of the economies in Sub-Saharan Africa are what you'd call resource rich, whereby the resource exports account for more than 25% of the export base. And because of the fall in commodity prices, you tend to see, and the unfortunate bit here is that most of these economies have not applied fiscal rules or stabilization funds, whereby they have enough resources to do the stabilization in such a shock. And we've seen this in recent past. And what this also implies is that if you have your resource inflows and outflows are not matching, then it also means that you are likely. So, are you hearing me? I'm getting an echo, but I hope we're on the same page.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, what it also means is that the resources for development are going to be compromised. One is the revenue base, and also secondly is that you people who are in the diaspora are going not to remit as much as, and the World Bank here has done a report so drastic reduction in remittances forecast for Africa. And also what this means is that the inflows for foreign currency are not coming through. And that affects also the exchange rate. So in terms of what we see as downside risks, we see that the exchange rate will manifest with sizable risks, but also without I'm getting an echo. I hope someone should mute their mics. Okay, so okay. Yeah, so the downsides that come from the exchange rate alone. Okay, Dennis, can you now hear me?
Yes, I can. We can hear you clearly now.
Yeah, so the outlook risks will manifest in many ways. One is that the commodity prices are affecting revenue, commodity revenue. The deceleration in growth is also going to affect the level of the level of revenue collected as a share of output, but not only as a share of output, but also in absolute terms. So meaning that the financing for development is going to be constrained. And as one of the speakers alluded to, the expenditure patterns for most of the people in African economies are also changing.
Oh, I think you've lost Enoq.
Hello?
Hi, Enoq.
Yes, I can hear you. Sorry. So my internet was on and off. Sorry. So in terms of what we see from the macro end is that financing for development is going to be compromised. And we, as Africa, we've done at the Sustainable Development Goal Center, we've done studies to show that Africa as a continent is actually a continent that in terms of the development trajectory is to some extent isolated from the other continents, because you see that Africa has an entrapment of poverty. And when we look at poverty, we also see that a lot of, while you have about 40% of Africans who are poor, you have a significant chunk, and this is World Bank study, significant chunk that most of them hang around the poverty line. And a shock of this magnitude pushes the number of them, and this alludes to the number that I think Bankole talked about, where you have a significant number of people being hand to mouth. Now, again, it also speaks to the fact that if, and here in terms of financing for SDGs, we see that remittances are going down. ODA is going to be affected because output, because ODA is usually given as a share of GDP. And we know that GDP across the globe is going to be affected, particularly if you see the G20 or G8 or even OECD in broad, these economies are all in negative growth. So implying that ODA is going to be affected, and we've also seen even a drag in remittances. The other issue that you're going to see is going to come from the fiscal side. With the lockdown, and if there is continued lockdown, it means that implementation of some of the key development projects, for example, from IDA or even African Development Bank, may not happen at the pace that is needed. And that also means that the remittances, particularly for development projects, may not manifest. So what do we see again on the fiscal side of budgets? We see that there's an increased pressure to expand the budgets, but can they be afforded? I think we see that the fiscal pressure is significant, and Africa finds itself at this crossroad when it is at low levels of development, but at the same point in time, its levels of debt service have risen substantially. You have about 20 countries which are either in debt stress or at the risk of high debt stress. So again, here the fiscal space that is there is rather small. But then how you finance the fiscal deficit is going to be the most important bit. I think countries should desist from printing money because that has also its downsides in terms of, particularly for highly importing economies, because we have very few surplus economies, and those are predominantly natural resources. So countries should desist from printing money a lot of borrowing should not be non-concessional, because the expenditures that you're having in the short term are really stabilization measures, and in this case they have no economic return, but just to revamp the economy. So you should desist from highly non-concessional terms. That also speaks to heavy domestic borrowing. So to the extent possible, negotiated IDA and other concessional loans should be considered. In terms of the SDG arena, we see that almost all SDGs are going to be hampered. To start with, Africa was off track in terms of meeting sustainable development goals, and one that I could give in the interest of time is poverty. In poverty estimates before the COVID, we had an estimation that showed 90%, 9 in 10 people who will be poor will be in Africa. So about 400 million people in Africa will be poor in 2030. That is under the scenario of benchmark scenario where everything is normal. Now, with a downside shock, we forecast that this number is likely to grow to about 600 million, assuming that the virus is contained in the near term. So again, this speaks to the decade of action that is being dubbed the decade of action. There's more that needs to actually be done. But in terms of planning, it also now brings us back to reality on what we should be spending on. And I think in terms of budgeting, we must again rethink of a youthful population that we have. We have Africa's median population, a median age of 19. We need again to plan for this youthful population in terms of creating opportunities, in terms of building domestic ecosystems, in terms of building backward and forward linkages between sectors. And also it speaks, you know, today I was listening to one of the deputy governor of Bank of Uganda saying manufacturing today is still surviving in Uganda because it still can afford to do imports. So what that speaks to is that even the manufacturing that happens in Africa is linked to the outside world. So in terms of building domestic value chains, and I know a number of companies, even including fruit factories, where the juice concentrate or the fruits are not even coming from the domestic economy, and these are agrarian economies. And speaking to the agriculture sector, this again is a sector that is going to be hampered. The FAO has revised its numbers in terms of African nations that are in need of food assistance, and you're talking about 34 African nations. This is more than 50%. And this is rather sad given the size of arable land. So I think we need to bring this again back into the planning. And what also happens is that the return on the agriculture sector is quite limited. So that is to the extent that agriculture is not bankable for most. But I would be happy to hear from the African Development Bank, because their president here is very emphatic about the agriculture sector and thinks that the next billionaires are going to be in the agriculture sector. But in terms of agriculture sector, I think they need to build these buffers and not just build buffers. I think what Africa needs and what we've seen over the last 10 years is that the buffers that we had built in terms of foreign currency reserves, narrow deficits in terms of both fiscal and current deficits, all these have since given way, and that means that the vulnerabilities have increased. So there's need again now to come back for both central banks and monetary and fiscal policy to have a discussion. How do we rebuild these buffers? And it speaks to the same value chain approach, where you need to build your exports to narrow the space, but also have a more meaningful expenditure that is linked to these value chains. Now, speaking to that, and I think this is where a lot of expenditure that is happening, which I worry that may not reach the intended recipients. And because here you have rushed expenditure plans without without clear information and the lack of data. And this is where, again, I think as Africa, it was touched on before we started, that data is the main challenge. We even see that with SDGs, we can't monitor them. Only 4 in 10 SDGs can be monitored across the continent, but with outdated data. Now, what you see with most developed economies, they have high frequency data on income, which you do not have in African economies. So you cannot exactly tell the magnitude of the shock on income without looking at this data. The data that does exist with the pay as you earn or social security does exist, but it's not consolidated. It is not up there for analysis. So the numbers cannot be, we cannot easily tell. So, and lastly, and I would want to say that in terms of the shock, what I see, and this is my own estimate, is that I've looked at the extent of the lockdowns. We have about 44 countries that have either partial or full lockdown in Africa. And when you contextualize the lockdown and the length of the lockdown, you're talking about 6 weeks of the lockdown with an estimated about 20%, 30% potential production. So if I transpose this into economic output loss, it is equivalent to about a full month of GDP lost. Now, when you factor this into the full year, you see that almost all African economies are actually going to experience sizable reduction in growth, which negative growth basically is what I mean. So while some economies do speak to having positive growth, I think this is more optimistic. The assumption of a V recovery is rather too optimistic. We do not have a vaccine. We do not have viruses. We haven't reached the flat end of the curve. So the macro terrain is the assumptions. Right now the forecast cannot be relied on. We can only plan for the deeper downside.
Thank you so much, Enoq, for that extended breakdown in terms of the impact of COVID on the macroeconomic and also touching on the SDG. Of course, there's quite a lot of challenges. In the interest of time, if I go to Amira, I think, Amira, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
In addition, of course, of the question raised about how AfDB is going to champion agribusiness, agro-industry to create the next billionaires in Africa. As someone who's worked in the investment space, and of course you've been involved in quite a lot of deal and equity structuring and transaction, and what's your current view at the moment in terms of investment outflow in Africa, and of course looking at the global investment arena? We're looking at GDP fall. Like UK, we're already talking about 35% GDP fall, and US 30%. What does that mean? Is likely to mean on investment we're likely to see in Africa in the next few years to come? And with the COVID-19, are you seeing completely slowdown of incoming investment, or what's the situation in terms of some of the ongoing deals that were being considered with COVID-19 now having taken the stage and disrupting majority?
That's a huge. That's a huge question. That's a very huge question. And I mean, I think Enoq in his response had done a brilliant job in both relaying to that particular question. But listen, I'll touch on 5 key points, both connecting to your question on the status of investment in Africa, but more particularly with regards to what opportunities are there.
Yes.
And I think as Enoq initially started, the economic projections are severe. But there's always a silver lining. I mean, countries will get support from institutions like ourselves, the IMF, the World Bank, and other MDBs, but that's just a drop in the ocean. And I think the real question for us is how much of that will really go to small businesses. And I say that particularly because many governments are more focused right now on recurrent expenditure. So they're just trying to keep their boats afloat. For them, most of their budgets are dedicated to paying civil servants. I mean, approximately 80% of most government budgets goes off to pay civil servants, paid salaries. So now it's a real opportunity for leadership to step in. There needs to be a bigger imperative to reprioritize budgets. We can't go to the IMF as before and request money to cope while we're still doing business as usual. So I think, as painful as it sounds, there must be a different way to reprioritize our spendings. And this requires leadership and focus. I mean, this in itself will have a connection and also driving or reigniting investment back into Africa. But listen, investment globally is on the low. So this is not just, particular to the African continent. This is also an opportunity for us to reawaken internal investment. Create the next Dangotes, the next Tony Elemelus, the next Strive Masiwas of Africa. This is where we can see small businesses become potential unicorns if they do it right, and if they get the right support. I mean, one area with regards to investment internally that we need to reignite or to ignite further during this particular crisis is our industrial and manufacturing sectors. This is really a time for a more coordinated approach, a more coordinated transformation of the continent, and for us to look at diversifying our commodity producers. We need to be looking at a more inward manufacturing status. Manufacturing means jobs for us, right? How can we use this as an impetus to do more industrializations? So, I mean, this is an important question because I think maybe not a lot of African countries, but when you look at the West, there is a huge apprehension towards China. I mean, the West predominantly feels that China has not been transparent and have withheld information on the outbreak, particularly with the timing of the outbreak and the numbers for a while. And as a result of this, this has impacted their future intention to do business with China. So does this also mean that Africa will take a step back with partnering with China? And how does that impact our manufacturing sector? Now, we also need to think about, there are a lot of countries that are in debt to China, but want to reignite their local industries. I mean, will we continue to keep borrowing from China? Are we going to figure out how to have a more industrial base at home and potentially release the handcuffs from the East, so to say? So these are questions we need to ask ourselves right now. I think another key important point for us as well, when we're looking at investment into what sectors, Enoq mentioned the element of, vaccination, and there's this global race for a cure. Is this an opportunity for African governments? Is this an opportunity for African investors to look into the health sector and reignite that as a focal sector? I mean, this is not the first crisis. It will not be the last crisis. Neza alluded to this. We need to put the health sector at the center of our investment strategies moving forward, and that's very important. And I say this again because if I borrow language from the cancer fight, will we once again replay the debate that we saw with regards to getting companies to assert their rights and to limit the rolling out of generic drugs for Africans? And how do we ensure that, we implement different approaches coming to Africa? So there's not an apartheid system on this issue where Africa is last in the line to get medication or vaccines to COVID, but also in general to other crises that we may face. For instance, we have the drug used for Ebola. And I think this was Diver. And this is known to potentially have an effective or a positive effect against COVID. And the United States at this point is using this drug on some of their patients. And as Dr. Anthony Bauchi had mentioned, we're seeing some level of effectiveness in its usage. Now, if it has that potential, what's the plan to get it to Africa? Where are we using it in Africa? And if it is in Africa, do we have it at the scale we will require it? And most important question, in an affordable manner. So that's an opportunity for investment as well. Another area I would say is, not another area, but still connects to vaccination, is we need to make sure that we don't, Africa is not the relegated player with this whole situation with Corona and COVID-19. We need to ensure that we don't have a replay similar to what we had with HIV and the delay in affordability of drugs and antiretroviral drugs, where it took a long time to come to the continent, and as a result of that, many people died. We need to rally behind our public health officials and governments and ensure that this is central to their agendas, particularly when they're engaging with donors. Now, another space where investment is important is, as a country, this is more on the public policy side. This situation with Corona and COVID-19 it's a fantastic opportunity for some of our countries to use this to step up and to potentially get some sort of clearance with regards to sanctions. And it's an interesting thing. I was thinking about it before our talk right now, and I thought, such as, for example, Zimbabwe. When we look at Zimbabwe, they could potentially use the situation to aggressively reform their systems in order to get more goodwill from other IFIs outside, which would hopefully release some of the sanctions that they're currently under. So countries, and this relates to my very first point, this requires leadership. This requires forward thinking and creative thinking. It's broad. Another interesting space that could touch upon your question, Eugene, with regards to drawing investment into the continent or igniting internal investment is the question about going green. We look at the impact of the lockdown has had an overall positive impact on pollution levels. But where does the climate agenda go in this question? I'm not sure, I think I caught a bit of Bankole's intervention, but you have oil prices going down and oil is easily available. Now, at the same time, renewable prices are falling. So what will be our response and option? Will Africa take the stage and be the torch holder in implementing a more renewable strategy within their energy sectors? Is this something, now that prices are affordable, that governments look at investing part of their budgets to ramping up, as Morocco has done, Kenya has done in the renewable sector? These are all questions we need to ask. But I think Neza alluded to it well. Investment within the digital space is going to be key. Who are going to be the winners in Africa? Really, it's about those that are into the cloud computing. We're going digital. Even after this, we will not go to work as usual. It's going to be part work, part cloud, laying more demand on the cloud technology. And as mentioned, if there's any other area apart from agribusiness, which is the next multi-millionaire sector, as Enoq had identified, it's the healthcare sector. But my real concern about that is, once COVID-19 is over, will our governments refocus and move their focus to somewhere else and leave our healthcare sector as fragmented as it is right now? I hope not. I hope we can take this opportunity to really draw investment into that particular space. And obviously as an area of opportunity, really create some players in that space that are a force to be reckoned with and move it forward. Thanks, Eugene. I hope I answered your question, but there you are.
Yes, you've tried to answer the agribusiness, which is a major.
So the agribusiness, I'm not an agronomist.
I know it's a hot topic. I know it's a hot topic at the moment, because if you look at the African space, I think we have 30% of arable land in Africa. Yet we import food worth 30 billion a year. And already there is global concern in terms of food security, supply chain, and looking at the disruption with the COVID-19. So it's likely to be a huge area to look into, and of course for investors who are looking to go green and the green bonds. And before I go to Bankole to talk about
absolutely. No, Eugene, it's a no-brainer. I mean, at the African Development Bank, agribusiness is central to our high five strategy. I'm not sure if Nez has also pointed this out, but it's one of the key high fives that is fundamental for our intervention, both on the equity, the debt side, and our lines of credit as well. But this is, I mean, driving investment in the agribusiness space, because also investing in agribusinesses it has its own risks pertaining to the investments you undertake, whether it's greenfield or brownfield. I mean, for us, it's a no-brainer. We have committed in the last 4 years over 4 billion to the agribusiness, or investing in agribusiness products across the African continent. How do we drive investment? I don't think it's a question about how do we drive investment. I think right now, with the global situation with COVID-19, it doesn't really release the fact that it's an important and lucrative industry. It just means that there's a lag in the investment, and what it does mean is that governments need to realign and reignite internal businesses. You know, investment needs to also come from Africans to invest in those particular sectors, not just at a smallholder scale, but at a large industrial level. What that does mean is that we need to also create the ecosystem and the value chain to ensure that we support agribusiness. And this means industrialization, which I previously spoke about, building the manufacturing space, so we're not just producing the raw materials and the raw goods, we're also processing, and we're developing the end products to that. Listen, the interest of the agribusiness in Africa has been, I mean, it's on the top agenda for a lot of Asian investors, a lot of investors from the West. They're in the continent, they're already here. I don't think they're going to remove their operations following COVID, but they're going to ramp up. So when we talk about investment, I'd like us to shift from just FDI, but internal investment to the argument of we need to create African millionaires, African investors investing in their sectors, more predominantly agribusiness.
It's good you touch on the point, of course, internal investment. And we know most of the African economy are cash-based economy, and they're holding quite a lot of liquidity that never circulate in the banking sector, which can be easily utilized to invest in certain, to grow some of the industry. And of course, it's good you touched on one point where the government can intervene to accelerate agri processing and production to add value. Recently, last year, I was involved in a consulting project in Tanzania to add value into cashew nut products, where the government actually stopped all the export of the cashew nut, instead they focused in investment in processing the cashew nut locally. And somehow we could process up to 12 products from one cashew apple, from wine to juice to lubrication. So this is the value that we can enhance. So talking about the other products across Africa, from cocoa to other, probably they need to be refocusing from export to more creating local markets, and also attracting local investment. If I go to Bankole, and then before I go to Dieudonne to talk about how we can accelerate industrialization, because it looks like they're all interlinked. Bankole, there was a question about green bond and creating a framework for green energy, and there was a question you wanted to answer alone.
Yeah, so the first question was actually looking at, is there still integrity for businesses that has actually been agreed upon prior to COVID-19? The question actually has answers in several layers. First of all, the first response is that, yeah, well, COVID-19 is force majeure. It's not caused by any party in the business. So my uninformed business knowledge is that, yes, we can't actually say you have to invalidate a business because there's COVID-19, because none of the parties is actually responsible for COVID-19 if it's not part of if it's not particularly tied directly to the delivery of the service that the business is directly supposed to deliver. But on a broader scale, I think if this question is applied to the wider African context, I would say that the integrity of valuableness or the invaluable nature of Africa being a destination of choice in terms of investment is not shaken at all by COVID-19. The fact that COVID-19 has happened does not mean investment should stop in Africa. If for anything, it should be the real action time for people to now invest in Africa. Because now we can't actually, there's no cover anymore. There is no lining anywhere to say we have this or we have that. At the moment, we know we don't have data about the 90% bottom of the pyramid in our economies. It is very clear that we don't have adequate health infrastructure, as I've mentioned earlier. So there are a lot of gaps that are actually opening up now. So it is actually the right time for investors to look inward and to invest in Africa, because right now we have everything opened up and there are a lot of opportunities opening up every day. And we also understand that the level of infrastructure that we have right now cannot sustain the nature of the business of who we want to be in the future. So definitely that is not in doubt. But even behind that, because I'm a sustainability professional and as a social performance expert, I always look at it from my practice perspective as well. From my practice perspective, I think there's also a need for policy upgrade and practice improvement. For example, when COVID-19 started, the first point that we raised as a Translantic Development Limited, because we're into full environmental, social, and governance practice, was that, look, across Africa, one thing, because I have worked from North Africa to East to Central Africa to West Africa, and I work significantly in Europe, one of the areas that we don't look at a lot is emergency preparedness and business continuity. Now, emergency preparedness and business continuity plan, oftentimes when you write your environmental and social management plan, environmental and social management framework, people just write an emergency preparedness plan. Sometimes it's just a page document to say the organization will respond accordingly. Now, that does not really mean anything in real times, because respond accordingly could mean that you close down the business and then there's going to be 5,000 job losses. Respond accordingly could mean that you follow your staff and then you put them on zero salary where they begin to rest and wait for the government to provide solution for them. So now, emergency preparedness is a key component of sustainability that would ensure that when there is a challenge, there is adequate shock absorber to ensure that business, a pandemic like coronavirus, for example, will not bring an end to 5,000 jobs in an organization. So organization needs to make it a critical component of their sustainability framework that emergency preparedness is completely in place, and there is always a business continuity plan, so that if people have to work remotely, what would happen? If there is fire, what do we do? If there is an outbreak, what do we do? How do we manage emergency situation? So we need to look at it from that perspective. So for me, when it comes to business destination for Africa, I think this is the right time. Coronavirus has got nothing on it. Africa definitely is a destination for investment with, according to African Development Bank, Africa requires an average of 130 to 170 billion US dollars annually to cater for its infrastructure deficit. So I don't think anywhere else in the world will suffer the same fate. So again, no matter how much money we have, we can sink it in. We can get it done. We have definitely something to do with it. So definitely the integrity of Africa as the destination of choice in terms of infrastructure development and investment is not in doubt. Now, when it comes to green bond and green finance and other sustainable financial instruments, this is a much bigger conversation, because over the last 3, 4, 5 months, this is the conversation that we've been discussing. We've been engaged in Nigeria and some other parts of West Africa a lot, and we've been looking at this issue from different perspectives. A lot of people still don't see the nexus or the connect between global warming, desertification, food security, vulnerability, gender issues, social conflict, and banditry, and ultimately local terrorism. These 8 things are connected. If there is extreme dryness from a water source, people will be forced to cut more forest. If they cut more forest, they create desertification, which creates flooding, and this flooding ultimately creates unstable environment to live in, and ultimately increase, when you cut down the forest, you create greenhouse gas emission, and ultimately you disrupt the biodiversity and that increased poverty level because according to statistics, 67% of continuous cropped land in Africa are infertile, which means people continue to open up more new lands. If you open more new lands, you cut off the canopy, you increase the global warming, and then you increase the poverty level, you reduce food security, and ultimately that comes back to the home level where you have social conflict, social violence, and then you have gender-based violence, which ultimately leads to the bigger problem. Because when you create people in a society that has nothing to lose, they will join the group of people in the society that have nothing to gain. Terrorists have nothing to gain, for example. They just want to disrupt the society. So if we allow global warming to create social imbalance for us, they will in turn create social violence. And that will complicate our situation. So we need to look at this issue strategically and solve this problem from its roots. So we need to begin to explore more opportunities in terms of green funding, sustainable financial instruments, and also there is need for the government across Africa and even the multilateral development lenders, IFIs, and other development agencies to even ensure they engage the government across Africa to talk to them about green funding, sustainable financial instruments, and even also get them to understand the implication of this. There is a connection, there's a very strong connection between poverty and terrorism. I was born and raised in Lagos, Nigeria, and I know for a fact that Africans are not people who wake up one morning and wear a suicide vest. But we're getting close to that point at the moment. It means that people are getting to their boiling point. So we need to plug this poverty gap. We need to plug this food security gap. We need to plug this social violence gap. And until we plug it, we can't solve the bigger problem. So we need to look at it strategically beyond COVID-19. COVID-19 is a pandemic. With all efforts in place by whatever support we're going to get within the next 6 months, chances are, or 18 months according to the international medical agencies, 18 months time, there's going to be a vaccine for COVID-19, hopefully. If we come to that point, that does not solve food security problem. That does not solve banditry problem. That does not solve local terrorism problem. So the green funding, sustainable financial instruments, and as you would see, oftentimes when the policies are being, when the local policies or the country systems are being compared with international lenders' requirement, such as the IFC performance standards, or you compare them with the AfDB, ISS, or you compare them with the World Bank Environmental and Social Framework, they are markedly below the point, and they are archaic. We need to clearly take a policy response to ensure that sustainable financial tools are actually being in place and the government is giving the right concession to performance and not just keeping it as a policy, as a redundant policy, but an active policy that people can actually see the value which this drive. For me, sustainable financial tools in response to COVID-19 is not just a wishful thinking, it's actually a thinking that can actually take us to the future that we want to be. If not, we're going to solve coronavirus problem, and we're going to be fine. And after coronavirus, we're going to jump into a bigger problem.
Thank you, Bankole, for, of course, we've already forgotten that we had a pandemic in East Africa for locust. I don't know if they are still there or COVID-19 has taken the center stage. If I go to Dieudonne, I'm sure you are listening to my majority of the discussion talking about industrialization in Africa and how it's going to be a major aspect in how to increase food processing. Dieudonne, are you listening?
Yes, I'm there.
Yes, so we're talking about manufacturing and industrialization. As an expert who worked with various processing and manufacturing companies like Heineken and Coca-Cola, how do you see we can accelerate manufacturing and strengthen the manufacturing supply chain locally? And talking to that, there's a lot of debate going on about, is the current crisis likely to create an opportunity for manufacturing to be transferred from China to Africa, as majority of the OEM are looking for low labor, or they are also, we've learned that having one source of supply is a major risk to global players. So if majority of the global companies will be looking to diversify their supply chain, is this going to be an opportunity for Africa to to accelerate industrialization and boost manufacturing locally? Where do you see opportunities are?
Thank you, Ejen. Coming back to that problem, when you go around in Africa, you found that our main manufacturing industry are second hand, first of all. So during this time of COVID-19, some of them can't work even remotely. It means they need people on site. Accelerating automation, line automation in Africa can be one of the points where people can learn new skills of running a line remotely, operate the line, troubleshoot it. Like you said, the labels, even the labels of some lines you have in Africa, the maintenance resources are coming from China or from Europe. So I think we need in Africa to have also not second-hand line machine, but updated one. Then invest also in young people so that they can learn those new skills, so that we can ourselves maintain our industries and also have troubleshooting skills of them. Second thing is having those supporting service also for new technology, updated to new technology. We don't need people like from quality to go on the site in order to assure the product are good. With the new technology, we can remotely manage the quality of our product and the service with these statistical process control softwares, and we can manage to have people working remotely and supplying or supporting the performance of the line. Even the line efficiency can be followed while being at remote. But if something we need is to have those updated line, have skilled people to do that, and the investors also need to invest not in the kind of money, but have objectives or goals to have a given number of lines to come as a solution to the bumper crops in Africa. Because if you invest money, sometimes we are going to use that money also in things which are not be supporting remote areas, but those harvests in remote areas are being damaged while we are importing from China. Government also should have goals to cut food import and replace them the same food by homemade food. If we come to that point, it will be a great opportunity to start investing in updated industries, manufacturing industries, and in skilled people to be able to maintain, to overall to troubleshoot those lines, and also to seek for investors in terms of industries, not in terms of money. So I think that is an opportunity which we can take after this COVID-19. Because after this COVID-19, you have to make sure that we have been in lockdown without importing food, but food was somehow sufficient, but no money. So if we can manufacture those, we can add value to that food and try to dispatch it across the countries, it will be a good opportunity to have our own food being made at home and dispatched in our country without waiting from China or from Europe. Thank you.
Thank you. Of course, it's good you mentioned about looking about Industry 4 and the smart factoring, and we are going to have more discussion, and I think we scheduled a discussion on that, how we can accelerate manufacturing and manufacturing and industrialization in Africa, looking Industry 4 smart and automated systems, and so hopefully we'll be able to touch in those areas. It looks like we've gone beyond our time, so probably I just want to take one question from Dr. Linus, and then we can wrap up. We've gone quite a lot beyond it. It's very interesting discussion, quite a lot of challenges which will translate into many opportunities that people could look into. Linus, Dr. Linus, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you very much for that opportunity. And I would like to thank all the presenters, and I've listened to them and they were quite brilliant. What amazing panel you got today. My question today is focused on supply chain capability and the capacity. Amira did talk more about vaccine, and Bankole talked about business continuity, which are some things that are very important in these challenges that we face. So my question will look into, now that COVID-19 is a pandemic around the world, and everybody is thinking about how do we take items, good product or part from point A to point B. And at the same time, if we are not careful, this is the time that restricted goods and counterfeit goods and material laws could be relaxed and things start flowing the way they want. So my question is, how can we influence the business sector or supply chain in Africa to put our heads together and develop a sustainable, robust, and resilient supply chain capability that will serve all Africans?
I don't know who wants to answer that. Bankole, Amira, or Dr. Enoq, or Dieudonne, who would like to answer that question?
I will just give a small tip and then I can allow others to just get into it. So supply chain capacity and capability, and how we can leverage on the situation that we are now to actually get the best out of the system. My first response on that will be infrastructure support. Infrastructure intelligence, what I call the infrastructure intelligence. Some years back, I think in 2008, I was working with some experts back in Nigeria, and we're working with some agencies before Syria got into war. And we're working developing an integrated agricultural farm that will be linked to some developed infrastructure that will be an end-to-end solution where you produce orange on the site, you get the husks to go into feeding the piggery. There's going to be a rail line that takes the product from that point to the airport and then to the rail line where these products can actually get to their destination in less than 12 hours of production. Now, that kind of infrastructure is not something that the government can do alone. It's something that the government has to partner significantly with the private sector to make it happen. I'll give you an example. I work significantly across Africa, like I mentioned earlier. There are farms in Southern African region, within the SADC region, for example, in Beira region, and some parts of Zambia, some part of Zambia, where they produce, when they produce vegetable, those fruits and vegetables get to London Heathrow in less than 12 hours. Whereas that same vegetable wouldn't have made it up to Maputo market. Now, that is the power of infrastructure. Because these farms have direct train line that move product from the farm on the train line straight to the airport, get into the cargo plane, and then in 9 hours, they are in Heathrow. Whereas if the same farm, within that same farm, if traders come to buy it in Beira, they would have to wait for vehicle that will come the next day, and that vehicle would have to negotiate, and then the road is bad, and then some of those products will never make it to the market. In fact, according to statistics, over 38% of agricultural produce in Africa never make it to the market. And another 15% get decayed in the market, go bad in the market. So again, intelligent infrastructure is the right direction to go, and it means that not just the government, but the private sector should be actively involved in developing infrastructure and be actively involved in also the intelligence of screening for products and creating standards of what exactly is expected to go into the market.
I'll just add briefly, very briefly, because I think Bankole answered it. Linus, thank you so much for that question, because I think it's a very important question. Briefly, I think we need to build really strong institutions. I mean, for any private sector to thrive in any space, you need to have a strong investment climate, strong policies, law, regulations, and institutions. So, I mean, the issue of counterfeit and and also below par products moving into the market, ending up on the tables of our families, going into the bodies of our children and our parents and other relatives, has to stop. And if I just take an example of one of those firefighters out there who is in the industry in the pharmaceutical space, Dr. Dora Kanyile, Nigerian, she was out there putting her life on the ground, trying to ensure that anti-malarial drugs and in general all pharmaceuticals coming into Nigeria that were generic and were counterfeit stopped. But there are huge cartels behind these businesses. So we need to get policymakers on the table to put this as a priority. That sounds like a huge elephant, but I think the power of the civil society is fundamental. You and me have a role, and it's for us to come as a cohort to voice these things out. And as the cohort becomes bigger and more organized, these issues are then set on policymakers' tables. But strong institutions are key. A concerted intervention by you and I as civil society out there speaking about these issues are key. And also corporate councils, business councils, which bring together the voices of business people across the country, regions, etc., also need to make this an issue. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that question. It looks like we've run out of time. To very many thought-provoking challenges ahead and so many things to think. So we'll continue to host this discussion on a monthly basis, inviting various speakers to share their perspective. Just to wrap up, if I can ask our speakers to just give 1 minute summary, how they see the future look like in Africa and where to look for as we look forward to recovery. And then we can wrap up. If I start with Bankole and then probably go.
Yeah, so I'm an African, and I'll always be. I always say to people that no matter how British or how many times I live in London, I can't be a white man. I'm a black man. So I'm an African, I'm Nigerian, I'm an Ijebu man. So definitely, the future for Africa is very bright, and that is one huge advantage that we hold because we have a very fertile land. We have very fantastic brains. I would say Africans are one of the most intelligent people on the planet. And more importantly, we have a very young population, which means that the future actually belongs to us, and we have a lot to offer. So we shouldn't be down or be drowning in the negativities that are all around us. We can always look at the bright side, and hopefully, if we do that, this COVID-19 can actually be a turning point. It can be a watershed moment for Africa to really to attain its potential.
Oh.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bankole. Clearly quite a lot to take away. Amira, what's your final thought in terms of the future? What should we think as we prepare for recovery?
Listen, I think I'm going to resonate from Bankole's point, but I think as we look at this particular situation, Enoq had presented some incredible data, and more importantly, I think a toolkit for governments. Careful with overspending, careful with redirecting your focus vis-a-vis your budgets. Don't go and overprint currency, but go out there and support the SMEs and the MSMEs that are the mainstay of your economy. We need leadership right now. We need African leadership, and that comes at many levels, both at the top level, but also at our level. I don't think we should ever feel far from having an intervention in our policies in our countries and having a say. What that means is that we need to be concerted and we need to work together. So, I mean, all that being said, Africa is going to be central, not just to our regional economy, but to the global economy. It is already central, and I think the faster we realize that as Africans and take hold of our destiny, invest in our countries, invest in our businesses, build the next African unicorns amongst ourselves, it's very important. We need to be in control of that time. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Amira. Enoq, what's your thought in terms of how the future look like and what should we be considering as we prepare for recovery and hopefully to accelerate growth? Clearly, Africa is ripe for investment and opportunities are just unfolding. Hi, Enoq. While waiting for Enoq, Dieudonne, what's your 1 minute summary in terms of moving forward? Hello?
Okay, hello. My 1 minute summary, I can say, where you're going to see after COVID-19 that Africa, at the end of the day, we need to be autonomous on somehow, or collaborate on a global level, but don't wait everything will come from there. We have to give and receive. That is why we even suggest some support to some country we can also support. And I think they can support it with their new technology, but we can also support with our agricultural resources. And if they bring those new technology in our country, in our Africa, we can even we can cut the cost of transportation and bringing back into Africa while collaborating. Everyone know what he's investing and what he's gaining from that investment. Not transporting raw material to China, then bring back a final product. No, we can do it in Africa itself and send it to China or to Europe, and we can collaborate on that level. Thank you.
Thank you, Dieudonne. If I go to Enoq, Enoq, can you hear me? I can see him by. Hi, Enoq. Oh, I think he's trying to connect. So anyway, it looks like Enoq is he's just kind of, we lost him, and Neza had to leave earlier for another meeting. Thank you so much for the speakers for sharing their perspective. It's been insightful, quite a lot to learn. Many opportunities ahead, of course, coupled with challenges. But as just to summarize, Africa is full of opportunities and is ripe for investment. Those looking for investment, and we should use the current crisis as a springboard to grow and create. Hello. So we should use the current crisis as a springboard to create new opportunities, and of course address some of the gaps now we are seeing in the African market. Thank you so much for our speakers for the time and for being with us today. And I hope for the rest of the audience, you find the discussion insightful. So we'll continue to host this kind of discussion on a weekly basis, tackling various topics and looking at the economy, looking at the industrialization. Yes, who's? Oh, okay.
Did I miss my parting shots?
Yes.
Get going.
Okay.
Yeah, no, but I think on the macro aspect, I believe macro stabilization is very important. We need to survive the war. So we need to survive. So that's why macro stabilization is very important, but it does not address the structure constraints, the structure bottlenecks that we face, and which then feed into the discussion on industrialization that you're talking about. I think that's what I wanted to speak to, but also given in the interest of time, maybe let me leave it there. But it's something that I wanted to expound on.
We have another session in 2 weeks' time on accelerating industrialization in Africa. Hopefully you can join that one and be able to share more on that topic. And for the rest who's interested, I will share more detail so that you can join. You can look some of this technology, Industry 4, we can look smart manufacturing and of course various technologies and digitization of some of the industries in Africa. So thank you so much. Have a good afternoon. It's been a pleasure having everyone and for joining and sharing. Very insightful. And stay safe and look after yourself. Thank you so much and have a good
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.